8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Project Egg Show. Today, still in Oklahoma City on our travels here, but we have the honor of speaking with Stefanos Sifandos, a relational alchemist and a total badass. How you doing today, Stefanos?
Good, brother. I'm very, very happy to be here.
Oh, the pleasure's all mine. So I know we're on a little bit of a time crunch today, so let's jump right in. What is your story?
Oh, where do I start? What would you like me to focus on? Let's make that interesting. Which aspect of the story would you like me to focus on? There's so many facets to our stories, right? There's so many elements that make us who we are. So which part would you like me to focus on?
I want people to look back 10,000 years from now and get an accurate documentation, like get a real accurate portrayal of who you are as a person. So whatever story accomplishes that.
That is an awesome response, brother. So I'm going to begin and end with willingness on that, and then I'll obviously fill in the gaps. And so I wasn't willing as a kid because I was paralyzed by so much fear because of the experiences I had as a child. So many of us can relate to this: the isolation, violence, abuse, emotional, physical, sometimes more than that as well. For me, I experienced great amounts of physical and emotional abuse, very volatile environment, and I didn't have the willingness to really move through my fears around that. And so I withdrew from the world and became very passive. Now, that was the earlier parts of my childhood. As I moved through adolescence and moved through my teenage years and into adulthood, I became so frustrated. I became like a pot boiling, but with the cap on, just wanting to explode. And so I did. That's exactly what happened. And again, still not willing to face my fears, still not willing to look at my stuff, what was hidden in the basement or in the closet, and the shadow element of my own self. And so that came out in unhealthy, extreme ways. Again, I basically mimicked what was familiar to me in my environment. So violence, fighting every weekend, alcoholism, whatever I could do to numb the pain that was bubbling to the surface that I would push down really well. I would engage in extreme sport and fitness and so forth. And anything I could do to tire myself out so I wouldn't have to think about anything. Yeah. And of course, again, the aggression, the frustration, because I lived for so long being very passive and withdrawn from the world that I didn't know really what it meant just to be a balanced human being. So in other words, how can I just deal with conflict or a situation that was difficult or challenging without reacting to it and losing control of my faculties, my emotive faculties and my physical self, and just be calm and patient with that. And that was something that I learned. It's taken me so many years. And then I hit an apex point, and I'm giving you the fast track version of this, of course, but I hit an apex point where I was part of my journey as well. And part of my distractions was sex and women and so forth. And it wasn't so much a sex addiction per se. I mean, pornography was part of that as well. But again, pornography was definitely not an addiction. I used pornography sparingly. There were times where I used it intensely, absolutely. But there'll be years when I wouldn't even use pornography either. So it wasn't an addiction for me per se. But when I used it, you could say maybe I was addicted to it because it was a very good distraction when I didn't use it. It's just that I could also take myself off it very quickly as well. This is years ago. And so I used all that. There was prostitution, there was womanizing, it was anything I could do to just get away and escape the pain and the trauma of my past and not deal with it as it was arising in the present in terms of the way I was treating others and treating myself. And so for me, the apex point came when I was in a relationship a number of years ago, and that woman discovered that I was unfaithful. And that really opened up Pandora's box for me of how do I want to be in the world? What type of man do I want to be? Is this behavior normal? This isn't healthy. I mean, I'm suffering all the time. My businesses are suffering. I'm experiencing volatility in my businesses as I experienced volatility in emotions as a child. So success in my business 1 month or 2 months or 3 months if I was lucky, and then no success because I was in entrepreneurial ventures and so forth. And so I make a lot of money 1 month, no money for a few months. And there was just this disparate nature of me being in the world. It wasn't consistent. And so when I was willing to look at the wholeness of who I was without judgment, because there was a lot of judgment at the beginning, and without compartmentalizing massively who I was and who I was being, without hating on myself. And that was a journey. I had to go through all that, but to be open to looking at all these quote unquote ugly parts, if we were to label them. And it wasn't until I was really willing to go into my fears and into my traumas and into my childhood stuff and into the truth of my behaviors that I was able to shift a lot of that and more. And so the willingness piece is everything, man, because I started really, in my background, and I've been studying this for nearly 20 years, I suppose. Yeah, nearly 20 years, is in behavioral science, psychology, Western psychology, Eastern mysticism, and Eastern philosophy. And I started to bring that back into my being at the forefront of my heart and mind, but really started to act with it in greater integrity and started to ask questions around humanity and what if, because I started to experience the very visceral, real changes and transformations I was going through and the benefit that was having on me and to others. I started asking questions around this the potency of willingness, the willingness to explore and willingness to see ourselves fully, willingness to experience ourselves, no matter what we look like to others, no matter what we look like to ourselves. And what does it mean to be whole in the world? Because surely this perception of wholeness lends itself to us expressing greater levels of potentiality. Then I started looking at the relationship between self, pain and fear, and even beauty and glory in the world, because sometimes that can be very difficult for us if we're not accustomed to experiencing beauty in the world and love. So I started just looking at everything and going into it, not just looking at it as an observer outside in, but actually going in. And I still do that. And so when you ask that question of what I want to be remembered for 10,000 years from now, it's willingness. It's a willingness to go where so many of us are too scared to go, where so often I was for so long scared to go. And to be able to break through that and embrace that fear and be willing to deal with and be with what's on the other side or sides of that.
When you hit that apex point and you started to make the change, you started to ask yourself those hard questions. How did you know what questions to ask yourself? How did you know the steps that you needed to take in order to pivot or to even begin the process?
I didn't know the questions, and I didn't know the process. I didn't have the steps. All I knew as a reference point was the immense pain that I was feeling. And there was really 3 ways that I could see to move through it: commit suicide to end the pain that was unraveling so deeply, the shame, the guilt, the fears that were rising to surface, because as I was coming into contact with this darker side of myself, I was also clearing at the same time, making space for more deeper, darker emotions to come to the surface. So I didn't have answers for that. And all I knew was I was either going to commit suicide, end up in a mental asylum, because that's what it felt like at times, or live through it to then be able to articulate the essence of the story and the value of the story and the stories around that to be able to serve other people. Because I started noticing very clearly that it wasn't just me that was going through this. It wasn't just me that was experiencing pain and difficulty in my life and not being able to face my fears and not feeling whole and not living authentically and in congruency with my highest values and so forth. There was others as well. And so that's when the questions were able to open up, as I started observing more. And then I also sought help. I didn't do this on my own, and I spent deliberate time in solitude as well. And I thought that was very important for me, because I didn't want to be with others and be influenced or distracted unconsciously. And so I wanted that time to actually face and be with and that took some conditioning, that took some exposure. That was because that was immensely painful, but little by little, and then longer times, and the periods of times extended that I would be on my own with myself and with everything that was arising. And that was, in the moments, it was very painful and very scary, and it was deeply empowering and liberating.
Wow. So as you were on this process, and you mentioned something very interesting of not just learning about something or staying at the surface level, but really, really going deep into something.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like? Because recounting a tale, you can cover 30 years in 30 minutes, but what did that actually look like? What did it actually feel like to just face
Death,
these?
death, felt like death. Felt like death. And the only way for me to do that, and I went through different cycles. And so it's a very interesting question that you ask, because you're very accurate, and we can tell a story of 300 years in 3 minutes as well. It's very easy to do. And what it felt like was death, and it was the ego dying. It was the various aspects and expressions of myself in the world, and how I related to the world, to things, to the environment, to people, to relationships, to myself, and all the various aspects and inputs of myself were dying, because those belief systems that underpinned and fundamentally supported that expression in the world were decaying. And so parts of me were decaying. And that was very intense. It literally felt like I was physically dying. And I've been on plant medicine journeys where I've had that experience before as well. And this was very profound. And I'd be on my lounge room floor crying, screaming, not having a voice anymore, not knowing where to go, not knowing how to express, not knowing where to turn, looking around in disorientation in a lounge room that I grew up in. I was very familiar in that place, but I was completely disorientated. Like, where am I right now? Like, I didn't even know where I am right now. And I felt like demons were coming into me and coming out of me. I felt like I was being possessed, because I was feeling feelings at such extremity that I hadn't felt for so long, that I pressed and suppressed within myself. And so it had to come out. And I'm very thankful that all of the deep work that I did in resilience training, in physical resilience training and mental resilience training, was able to actually prepare me to be able to cope with the stress, the intense, extreme, prolonged stress of experiencing that. Because I think if I didn't have those reference points of experiencing, tough times in my life, physically and mentally, emotionally, etc., because they integrated, I don't think I would have been able to go through that in any capacity.
So once you started to dig in, did that mean uh, like a meditation? I know you talked about solitude, but I'm thinking from the perspective of somebody who may be in that pain still right now, and they're like, "Oh my God, finally somebody understands because they've been there." How do you dive into those things? Because there are all those different things. Like, how do you dive in? How do you build that foundation and come back?
Yeah, I unknowingly at the time, I created this cyclical process for what I call healing and transformation, and it gave me the opportunity to experience experience space in between the exploration and in between the pain. And so for me, and I put it together after I started reflecting on the experiences, once I had greater space, and the wounding I'd gone through the wounding per se. And so it was a 6-step cyclical process. I'm very happy to share that. And so the first portion is depth. I call it depth. And that means coming face to face with your fears, with your demons, with the devil, with the darkness, with whatever you want to call it. It's coming face to face with the pain. Now, you can do that in various ways. You can do that in meditation. You can do that by allowing yourself to feel the feelings. You can do that by bringing memories up, specific memories, painful memories, and recalling them, and then sitting with the pain of them, and allowing that to stew in your body and your mind. But you've got to be very careful with that, because that can bring up a lot of pain. And if it's too intense, too quickly, we can sometimes get lost in that. And that's what happened to me. I was luckily very able to pull myself out. I often say I went to places that no human being should go. And I'm not the only one that's done this, of course. And if you can come back from those places, then it actually is worth going there, because it gives you a deeper sense of self. And so depth is part of it. So and again, depth doesn't have to be so deliberate. It can be more responsive. So you hear some bad news, or some news, maybe someone that is passing away, or you have an argument with someone and it's really hurtful. Can you just be with the feelings that you feel angry, that you feel distressed, that you feel frustrated with that person, that you feel betrayed? Be just being with the feelings, allowing yourself to feel instead of distracting yourself with alcohol or distracting yourself with working too much or distracting yourself with partying or whatever it may be, right? So the depth can come in those forms. I want to be very specific. Then after we've experienced the depth, we want to purposely, deliberately stop feeling. And now what we move into what I call deliberate distraction, conscious distraction, aware distraction. And so it's very important to ground. Have a glass of water, eat some food, go to the beach, be with nature, put your bare feet in the earth, experience the earth's magnetic resonance, be grounded. You can do some exercise in this phase as well, like literally move your body, go for a walk, sweat, go for a run, do some weights. If you're really angry, hit some boxing bags, whatever it may be, like really exert some energy here. Then we want to go through some release. And so the release part can be doing some journaling after that. There are other techniques in the grounding and in the release that I suggest, like I have a neurological shake process, but these are more advanced techniques that I won't explain here so much. They're more advanced techniques, but that can happen in the grounding and the release. The release, the journaling is really good. You can speak into a mirror as well, but it's some form of verbal release that is getting it out of the mind and into the ether, into the environment. Then we want to go through some reprieve. And so there's a stage of reprieve, and that looks like, again, being in nature, gentle walking, getting a massage, self-nurturing practices, having a bath, whatever it is for you that nurtures you, but that carries healthy outcomes sustainably. So for example, someone might say, well, if I go to the pub or a bar and have a beer, that makes me feel really good. Yeah, but drinking alcohol it's a numbing agent. So it's not necessarily the best physiologically for you, even if you're just having one or two. And the associations made with that environment may not be healthy either. So try and really be in nature and be clean and clear. And at this point, you still want to be on your own. Then we move into a place of introspection. And introspection literally involves some silent practice and meditation. You can do that in nature, but stillness. It's a stillness practice. So again, sitting in stillness, eyes closed, just being with your body, being with yourself. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, whatever. Then we move to a stage of social. And here, what I want you to do is actually be with friends, people that are healthy role models, people that you trust, respect, and revere, that you can potentially share what you're moving through, the angst and the difficulty that you're going through. Or maybe you're not sharing with them, but you're at least having fun with them. You're laughing, you're watching a YouTube video that's a comedy, you're making yourself laugh, you're bringing laughter and joy into your life. And you can actually do that in the grounding phase as well. Also, the social part of it is also open for having a psychologist in your life, a spiritual healer, a shaman, a counselor, a spiritual guide, whatever it may be. Yeah. So that's a 6, and then you repeat. Then you go back into the depth. Now you can do all of this in a few hours, or you can do all of this in a week or so. Doesn't matter. Up to you. Obviously, the quicker you do it, generally speaking, the quicker you move through it. Not always the case though, because you need time. The reprieve may literally be a couple of days of rest. It depends. Each stage is different in terms of time modal domain. And so that's essentially what I did unknowingly years ago when I did it. And so I put it together and I developed a model for it, and which is just what I spoke to you about then.
That is an incredible model. And it really seems like that gets every facet of pain, that it addresses it and really faces it, deals with it in a very healthy way. And to me, it's almost like a cleansing. It's almost like a cleansing, which I think is very powerful. So once you developed that and you realized what you had done, what happened then? What did you do with that?
So it's interesting, man. Like my experiences for me, and I mentioned this earlier around, suicide, mental asylum, getting through this, and then teaching it, but not only teaching it, but also just being a voice for it, a very a healthy vocal posturing in the world for this. And I knew that for me to do that, I had to be more integrated in myself. And so I'd been in the health and wellness space for, again, I've been in the health and wellness space since I was 18. And so That's 19 years essentially. I'm 37 now. So I've been in that space for some time, and I started studying the mind, the human mind, behavioral science, social psychology from a young age as well, from my early 20s at university. And so I've had a passion and a yearning to understand human behavior and human potential from a young age, actually, from when I was a child, because Dr. John Demartini often says our voids become our values. And for me, I missed that as a kid. I missed connection and isolation. I was alone. I felt alone at least. And I wasn't always alone, but I felt that a great deal. I felt misunderstood, not connected. No one could see me for who I was. And so I wanted to understand what makes us tick, what makes us hurt other people, what makes us cause such disparity in our social cohesion, where 3.5 billion people, 3 billion people are in poverty, yet there's others that are living in an extreme wealth. They would never be able to spend all that money on themselves at all. And it's not about that's wrong or right. It's not about if you have a lot of wealth, you're wrong. Not at all. It's just that why do we live in that? There's such extreme disparity. So I went deep into esoteric mysticism and wisdom, but I want to honor your question. So what I did was I got clear once I shuffled through and sifted through, like a sieve, like really, I got everything out of me that was at the gross level. And then I went into at the gross level, and then I went into the subtleties of my being. I started creating spaciousness in my body. And with that spaciousness came clarity and discernment of where I wanted to go, exactly how I wanted to do it. I stopped engaging in burn build, and I just got hyper focused, hyper present, and hyper inspired and connected. And I started opening my heart more, man. That was a big gift for me. My heart literally opened more. I started experiencing a more coherent way of living, more sustainable, consistent way of living. My brain, my mind, my body, I was more coherent. And so I had clarity with what I wanted to be in the world and what I wanted to give. And I wanted to teach in this way, in the way I do now. And so I've been on that journey for a number of years, and it hasn't changed. And I'm very clear that's where I want to be. So what I started doing with this was compiling it, creating models, making it as aesthetically appealing as possible, refining my message, learning how to communicate better. But by practicing. And then I created, man, I purposely had various bouts of celibacy where I was retaining my seed and my energy, and I was creating, man. I created various programs and material. I've got so much content that I haven't even released yet. And because I was able to be creative and harness that creative energy into giving, because I was receiving so much for the first time in my life, really.
What was that journey like? You began to talk about it when you started going into the Eastern mysticism, I believe you said.
Mm.
What was that journey like for you?
Which part of the journey? The going into the Eastern mysticism and going into, oh man, it was deeply revealing. It was just a world that I always knew existed, but I never had the confidence or the faith to really believe it, because I thought that I would be ridiculed. I mean, I remember one of the first books I read. Cover to cover within like a few days, 3 or 4 or 5 days. I just really read it really quick. I was young. I was working on cruise ships at that point, and I was also very blessed to work with a Vedian and Ayurvedic master, and he became a mentor and a father figure for me as well. And I read this book called Walking with the Himalayan Masters, and I was just exposed to all these gifts that these men, particularly these men, were doing up in the mountains, and just being and tapping into their ultimate potential, universal cosmic potential. I was like, wow, I was just blown away. And I started believing, oh, this is real. I mean, this shit's real. We can do this. We can be human beings like we've never been before. I just started reading it more and expanding my mind more and experimenting as well. I started experimenting with different breathwork techniques, and I started experimenting just with meditation, sitting in silence, and what was coming to me. I was asking questions again of other people, and this was before my revelation of hitting that apex point. So I was come from this from a younger age as well, and it was just, for me, it was just, I was like a kid, man. I was able to be a kid again. I didn't get to be a kid when I was a kid because I became a parent very young, and many people would relate to this. I had to parent my parents. I parented my brother. I looked after my grandparents when I was older. That was more by choice, and that was just in me, and that was a gift to do that. I was just a parent for so long. I never got to be a kid. And so when I was away from my familiar environment, I was just this curious being that anything and everything was possible. Really, it really was. And I clung on to that during my times of despair and pain. And that really helped me through as well, that curiosity, knowing what's really possible and beginning to detach from the notion of death and outcome and things have to be a certain way. I was like, it's okay. I don't know, I got to a point, man, where, okay, if I'm not going to stop exploring. Like, I'm not going to stop going into the depths of this pain and the suffering and the fears and all of that, and knowing myself in fullness. So I just, whatever happens, like wherever I go, I'm cool. And I sort of got to that point. I did get to that point. And the moment I really released that attachment to the outcome, in other words, the moment I stopped asking, oh man, when will this be over? When I really legitimately stopped doing that, that's when it started to be over. That was the surrender. But there's a lot of fear in that though, because I got to the point where I was saying to myself, to God, the cosmos, divine, I don't even know what I was talking to. Okay, I'm here. Clearly, unless I kill myself, this isn't going to be over. Maybe it's not about being over. Maybe it's really about being here. So if you're going to take me here, let's go. Like, let's really go. Let's go deep. And I remember having these conversations with the room in my lounge room and crying and bubbling and screaming and just like, I was a blubbering mess. You know, I couldn't even speak. I remember these conversations, and those conversations were very raw and they were very heart opening as well. And they were the click points in my life where I started to change and shift massively.
That's incredible. That is incredible that you just totally surrendered to it. And that is when the transformation really started. So I'm curious, you mentioned curiosity and you started off by talking about willingness. And we just talked about surrender. And we've also been talking about like really getting in touch with who you are at your core. And I'm so glad that we got to speak today, because pretty recently, like probably about 6 weeks ago, I literally sat down and I wrote for 5 hours, and I was determined to not get up until I figured out, like, what is my purpose? Why am I really here? And I actually came to a conclusion that I'm on a journey of continuous self-discovery to get more in touch with who I am at my core. And you and I have very different paths, but it seems like in that aspect, we kind of came to the same conclusion. So I'm interested to know, once you got there and you did all these things, what else did you discover about yourself? Who are you really?
Yeah, and the answer to that, and I don't know if you're going to like it or not, but I don't know you well enough just yet. I have a feeling that you're going to be intrigued by it, but the answer is I don't know, and I do know. because here's the thing, right? And I know it sounds like a riddle, like a Zen riddle, like a Buddhist Zen riddle, and in a sense it is. And so let me break that down a little bit. The I don't know part is that I'm continually open to refining who I am and being a witness and observing to the parts that are unseen yet to be seen, and to bridge that if it calls for it. And the known part is that I have an unwavering clarity in terms of showing up and giving to the world whatever it is that I do, quote unquote, know or feel or have experienced. And I'm just very clear that that is a core reason as to why I'm here. And like yourself, another core reason as to why consciousness is moving through this physical vessel, occupying this physical vessel, or the physical vessel potentially is occupying consciousness, depending on what philosophy you come from, is to grow. And for me, that growth and expansion is paramount. And every opportunity, as Stoicism would present to us, as one ethos and philosophy that advocates this, is every opportunity is an opportunity for growth. and learning and teaching and deep connection to self and to others and to the evolution of whatever it is that we are. And so the answer is I don't know and I do know. And the I do know is I have an unwavering clarity, and sometimes I can't put verbiage to it, but it's a feeling. Most of the time I can, as I did just now. And the I don't know is, well, I'm just open and I'm excited about it. I don't need to know. I don't want to know. And I sort of do know, but I don't even know the details. I don't want to. That'd be boring.
That is a great answer. I love that answer, and I am massively intrigued by that answer. You're absolutely right. You mentioned consciousness, and there were the two distinctions there. What is your philosophy on consciousness and the different levels?
Mm. So I'm really intrigued by and magnetized to Advaita Vedanta, and that's a non-dual Vedantic philosophy. And so that permeates such scripture and magical titles such as the Bhagavad Gita, as an example. And so what that ultimately says, and you know, man, I mean, I'm on a very steep learning curve with this. But what that ultimately says about consciousness is that this is the paradox, right, as well. So, and I don't want to bastardize the teachings either in any capacity, but part of it for me is actually bringing this Eastern part of why I'm here as well, my friend, is to elaborate a little bit deeper, which is something a little bit more personal. I feel is to bring much of ancient wisdom into contemporary times in a way that is palatable for people as well, without dishonoring the etymological fundamentals of that ethos or of that wisdom, that spirituality. And so Advaita Vedanta says that you're not your body, you're not the object, you're not your thoughts, you're not your mind, you're not your emotions, you're none of these things. You're not your actions. They are objects in a world that your consciousness is perceiving. And there's only one consciousness. But subject and object are different. And so if subject and object are different, if something is happening in your mind, it's actually not happening to you because you are consciousness. And consciousness is Brahman, which is God, which is Godhead, the ultimate being, divine. And we're all one. And then we realize that we're all one and nothing is actually separate, but we have to understand it's separate to know that we're one. And so, I mean, I can intellectually explain that or cognitively explain that in less than a minute. But what does it actually mean? I don't know. Still figuring it out. and that's the thing, right? That's the mysticism of it. And you know, there are times when I'll listen to at least 10 hours of audio, 12 hours of audio every week, and I read and I do that religiously. I continue, and it's still I'm listening to the same things over and over again and allowing it to be absorbed by me, because these are complex ideas that our society has conditioned us not to really understand. And so in order to understand them and know them and feel them, because Advaita Vedanta is the path of knowledge, in order to really feel them and embody them, we have to be immersed in them and exposed to them. So I do my best to do that with the environment that I'm in, you know, the Western society that I'm in as well. Yeah.
I love that you said that one of the things that you're here to do, or part of your mission, part of why you're here, is to bring ancient wisdom and share it with the modern world.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of similarities between what we're doing now, that and what we're doing now, because in 10,000 years, this is going to be the ancient. Like, this is going to be the ancient wisdom.
Great way
And
to look at it.
and I feel like we are literally documenting that history right now. So it is so fascinating to me. How did that come to you?
Yeah, so because I think I alluded to earlier, I do ask a lot of questions of myself and of reality and of life. And so I was really asking many various questions around my own existence and my service. And I was looking at what am I really passionate about and inspired by, where I just move effortlessly in. And for me, I've been such an advocate of Eastern mysticism and I'm so attracted. I mean, like I've got 4 Bhagavad Gitas. I've got one underneath the book, underneath my laptop here. I've got 2 over there. I've got one, all different versions, right? Like I'm just and so many other books everywhere. And I've got 2 massive bookcases at home as well. Home is here in the US, California, but also home in Australia. I haven't even got them back here yet, back to the US yet. So it's just there's just so much that is there that exists in the world that we don't know about that can bring so much value to us. And I just feel, I was just asking questions, what can I give to the world? And I feel that that's am I great at it? Maybe. I mean, it depends who you ask, but I'm really inspired by it. And I've got certain skills, and I feel it's almost a duty to refine those skills and that expression, that communication, and bring that into the world. And for that to happen, I have to do my own inner work as well. I have to focus on me whilst I'm focusing on others, and vice versa. And I just felt being that bridge from the unknown to the known is very empowering for me. And it just resonates, man. It just feels right. And so how I came to that conclusion, or how I came to that connection within myself, was really just asking the question, then sitting back and observing what arises from that question.
I love that you said you're the bridge, because I had an experience that, um, yeah, I'd love to tell you about it another time because we don't really
Mm,
have all the time to go into it. But I basically came to a conclusion after a session of meditation. And let me just be the first one to say I don't meditate as much as I would like to, or as I probably should. But this one time it was very powerful. And it was incredible because by the end of it, I really felt like I was just a conduit through which energy could flow through. And the way in which I chose to express myself was the way in which that energy could be released and put into um, to the to this physical world. Um, and you know that's so fascinating to me. That is so fascinating to me. And to be honest, it was kind of weird too. I was like, I'm just there's this thing the energy's flowing through. Like that's a weird thought, but it's cool at the same time. So it's just interesting to me, um, that it feels like we've come to a lot of very similar conclusions from a very different path.
we all do, man. Like I'm not the only. You're a bridge. We're all bridges. We're all bridges from the known to the unknown. Before we know something, it has to be unknown. Before we take action, we have to experience passivity. Like we live in a realm of duality, in a realm of opposites in this physical world, and so we're all bridges. We all before we know something, it's unknown. Before we know how to walk, we didn't even know walking existed. So we're all bridges between that. It's just how we choose to tap into it and how clear we are on why it's important for us to be bridges. And maybe not everyone's primary or prominent role in the world is to be a bridge and to advocate that teaching or to express that in the world. Everyone's different.
I think that's powerful. So I want to ask you, because you've been able to do a lot of incredible things in your life, and I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. And
Thank you.
one of the things that I've been very impressed with among the many is the community that you've been able to build, and to have people, so many people attracted to you. To me, that is a in a very positive way, like a symptom or a result of a very deep sense of connection. And I don't say this lightly, but I really think that connection is a like a foundational virtue of humanity.
I
And
agree.
and so I'm curious to learn what your philosophy is on developing deep, meaningful, and genuine connection with another human being.
Show up consistently. That's a foundation. Because if what I learned in my life through my own personal experience and through observation and through my studies and traveling the world and so forth and every other experience that I've had in between is that when we are inconsistent in our behavior and inconsistent in how we show up to people, we sever connection and we sever intimacy, because that volatility creates distance and isolation. And I experienced that directly as a kid. And where it's like, you know, what was it, once bitten, twice shy, something like that. And so if you're volatile in your behavior, people can't trust you. Trust lays a foundation for intimacy and deepened connection and exploration of that. It lays a foundation for us to be vulnerable and explore and be raw and be real. We don't want to give our hearts or our thoughts or our position, even whatever verbiage you want to put around it, to someone that is going to take advantage of it, or they may not take advantage of it. We don't know that because they're not consistent enough in how they show up. So consistency is everything. And I learned that the hard way. I really did. Yeah. And I blamed and I shamed and I projected everybody on everybody else for not, you know, playing to the fiddle of playing to the tune of my song. But the reality was that I wasn't showing up healthily. I wasn't showing up consistently. And so how could people trust? How could they give themselves? Never gave anyone an opportunity because of my own unconscious actions. So consistency, show up consistently.
I love that answer. And
it's as simple and complex as that.
I think that's a golden thread of our conversation today. But you know, I feel like we could go on talking about this stuff for days and days. And you know, I appreciate the time that you've shared with me thus far. It's been very special and truly an honor, and I want to thank you. I do have one more question for you.
Of course.
What question should I be asking you, like specifically me, asking specifically you, that I just wouldn't think to ask?
There's two ways I can go here, but I think one is maybe a question that you would ask, and the other, maybe not so much. Maybe this: why take risk? Maybe that's something that you wouldn't think necessary to ask. Maybe I think you would at some point, but it would take some unpacking. But why take risk?
Can you answer that for me, please?
Of course. Because on the other side of risk, which is the unknown, right? On the other side of the unknown is freedom, that in its simplest form.
That's beautiful. Well, Stefanos, thank you so much, man. Seriously, like I'm very appreciative of your time. I'm so grateful that you would choose to not only, you know, come on the show and talk about these things, but really being willing to be vulnerable and to go deep there and you know, just be awesome. So thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. I deeply appreciate being here, and I appreciate your time as well. So thank you so much.
And to everybody who's listening, watching, I want to thank y'all very, very much. And you know, I know that y'all's time is very valuable too. So I'm very grateful that y'all would choose to share with us. So thank you. And I will see y'all on the next episode. Take care.